This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former Legislator Connie Wilson, NC Policy Watch's Chris Fitzsimon, Syndicated columnist and author John Hood, and former Lieutenant Governor Dennis Wicker. On this week's show, we're going to discuss the Senate budget proposals, and we'll talk about Governor Cooper's veto of the hog waste lawsuit legislation. And as always, we'll ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get started. The Senate put their budget on the table this week. Their $22.9 billion spending plan is a 2.5% increase over the previous year. The big story was a $1 billion tax cut to both individuals and corporations. Data released earlier in the week indicated a $580 million surplus over last year's revenue projections and indications of a strong economy. Large sums were allocated for rainy day and disaster relief efforts. Teachers and principals got pay boost, with rank and file state employees getting modest increases and retirees getting none. Education and transportation got large budget increases in this 800-page proposal. I want to go around the table and ask each of you to give a letter grade to the Senate budget and tell us your observations on it. John Hood, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm a pretty tough grader. It's in between a B plus and an A minus. I like the general principles of the budget. I like the general priorities of the budget. There are a few details that I would disagree with.
What specifically? What were your observations?
Well, we're going to talk about one of them later, but I would have structured the tax cuts a little bit differently. But in general, and some of the education funding a little bit differently, but in general, I think it was certainly reflective of what they promised that they wanted to do at the beginning of the session, so there's some truth at advertising. And in general, I like the continued fiscal discipline, lots of money put into savings. All in all, I think a pretty good start.
Dennis, give it a letter grade in your observations.
Well, since I'm one of those retirees, I gave it an F minus. But no, really, I think I'd give it a B. I thought it was a good budget in the area of education and infrastructure, you know, the transportation system. I thought they made some nice investments there, and with our community colleges and our university system. I did not, like John, I was a little bit negative toward the tax cuts. I thought it was a shift away from middle class to actually helping the wealthy, and I thought that was not a good.
Connie, give us a letter grade in your observations.
I would give them an A. And just like what has been said already, the policies that are in there are ideas that the Senate has been very strong about. The Republican caucus has promoted. They have a lot of policy that's in there that's giving the House heartburn, but you have Senator Tamara Behringer's area on foster care reform and DSS reform. Even though there are,
we're going to talk about that later.
Yeah, even though there's policy in there, I think it's extremely good policy. And there's money that's left on the table, and that's basically to say, you know, House, what do you want to do?
So A's and B's to you, Chris.
Well, it won't be an A's and B's. I'll give it a D, maybe a D minus for several things. First of all, most of the education spending is just for compensation. There's nothing wrong with that. But a report just came out. We're 44th in the country. We're only ahead of Mississippi in per pupil expenditure in the Southeast. We need to do more than just pay teachers. They need supports. But I think the thing that's, and I don't think the tax cut's a good idea. I think that it is overall the tax cuts since 2013 are tilted toward the wealthy. But the thing that hasn't gotten enough attention, this is a very petty partisan budget. They went through the Department of Public Instruction and DEQ especially and targeted individual state employees. First of all, they made big reductions to the departments, which I thought was objectionable. But then they went after filled jobs that are close. Secretary Regan's top assistant, they eliminated her job. They went to DPI, eliminated the state board operations person. They went through and they have a political partisan agenda, and they're firing people in a state budget. And the last thing is, Connie mentioned policy. They for example, a moratorium on wind farms. Now, you can say it's a good or a bad idea. That doesn't belong in the budget. They couldn't get that bill passed in the Senate. They stuck it in the budget, so now it's up for negotiation. The process has been as bad as I have seen in 20 years.
Connie, Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger said his chamber deliberately didn't spend all the money, as you mentioned earlier. because our state's gotten into trouble in years past when we spent everything that we had and then later had to come back when times got tough and cut budgets. Is his rationale justified? And let's just say we did spend all the available money and later had to come back and cut budgets. How big a problem is it?
Well, I think it's a good argument because there is money that's left on the table, but I think this is the first step in a two more steps in the process. We go to the House now. And so the debate now within the House has been, okay, are we going to do $1 billion tax cut? Are we going to be more at $300 million where our bill was? Or are we going to do even more? So what the Senate has done is left money on the table to say, okay, House, basically the House and Senate appropriations chairs have agreed on the money side of these budgets, the target amounts that are in each individual budget. So now there's some money to play with, which may be more in tax cuts or it could be more in spending in the House budget. So really, this is more for flexibility.
John,
it's worth noting that to distinguish between money left on the table and money that is saved, because both things are in the budget, but they're not the same. A little over $300 million in the first year of the two-year budget is money that has been received by the state that is not being authorized to be spent by the Senate budget. It's not being put into savings, it's just in the unreserved credit balance. In addition to that, there's $350 million over 2 years put into the rainy day fund, and another $75 million put into the Medicaid fund to fund the transition to the new system. So there's a lot of money here that is already explicitly saved, not available if you took it at face value for the House. But there's also, as Connie says, some money left unallocated.
I want to ask you and Dennis, both of you mentioned that you didn't particularly like the tax cut package. The Senate essentially increased the standard deduction up to $20,000 for married couples filing jointly, reduced individual tax rates from income tax rates from roughly 5.5% to 5.35%, and corporate rates from 3 to 2.5%. Berger bills this as the middle class $1 billion tax cut. What's your objection to it?
Well, I generally like everything that you just said. I have some objection about some of the specific details. I like taking the corporate tax rate further down. That if you're looking at economic growth in the long run, that's the best bang for the buck tax reduction is the corporate tax. Interestingly, the governor has criticized the Senate budget for giving away too much money to corporations, and then he just turned around and gave tens of millions of dollars in tax incentives. Apparently, according to some, it's okay if you give out tax breaks to companies on an individual basis, the ones you like, but not okay if you cut them across the board. The House or the Senate budget on income taxes, the rate does go down, but that standard deduction increase helps lots of middle income families.
Yeah, he said 99% of all individuals
would either get a tax cut
or
they already don't pay taxes.
Now, Democrats, Dennis, are saying this is just another tax cut for the wealthy.
Well, I think you could argue that. I think Senator Berger is, though, doing what he said he would do. He said he would come in there and he would cut these taxes and try to help the middle class. But I think in the process of doing that, you have to ask at what cost. And I would look at this two ways. One is, you remember they increased the base of the sales tax last session and placed a sales tax on repairs and things like that, which clearly falls on the middle class more heavily than the wealthy. And then you have in this instance where they're trimming the top line of the tax rate. It can only help the wealthy even more. So the other way I would look at it too is, I still think we could invest more in our schools. I think there's still a long ways to go. We're still very low on per pupil expenditure. We still don't pay the principals what they should be paid.
Although there was an increase for that.
Although there was an increase.
Chris, they increased the rainy day reserves essentially to $1.8 billion, the most it's ever been. The rainy day fund by $363 million and $150 million for disaster relief. Too much? Just right or not enough?
Well, we still have a lot of issues with disaster relief because we haven't gotten nearly what we thought we would get from the federal government. I think it's good to have a rainy day fund, but at some point for state retirees, it's raining. State retirees got no, as you mentioned in the introduction, got no increase. State employees got 1.5%. At the same time, the budget eliminates health care for new employees when they retire, for teachers and new employees. We're going to have a harder and harder time recruiting really good, well-qualified, enthusiastic people to work in our state government if the best we can do is give them 1.5% and we completely ignore them when they retire. You know, at some point, what we're doing is we're picking and choosing. We're saying, oh, we're going to help the principals. We're dead last in principal pay. Let's give them pay this year because we don't have any more money to do anything else. Yes, we do. We keep cutting taxes.
Tom, I want to go back to something that Connie said. We got to keep in mind this is one half of the process. I think there were some things put in here to, I call it trade bait, to get the House to trade with them on those things. I agree with Chris, but I think that what we're hoping is the House, through the trade bait negotiations, that will get fixed.
And that's exactly how the Senate thinks. You know, once they get into this budget appropriating mode, it's, okay, we do this and the House does that. And so they're setting themselves up for negotiations.
Going back to the employee pay, $750 or 1.5% pay increase for rank and file state employees. Now, this is permanent, unlike past years where it was just a one-time thing. What's your reaction? State employees are not happy.
Well, they haven't gotten squat for a long time. I would not be surprised if the House came back at a higher amount for them, and this was just a starting amount.
Well, what's the problem, John, with giving a cost of living increase to retirees? I mean, for years and years and years and years, up to the Great Recession, that was sort of standard practice, 1.5% cost of living increase. What's the problem with not doing that? Why not? I think
I think the retirees as a group were more sympathetic when, you know, people like Dennis Wicker were not associated with them. It's a PR problem more than anything else.
It's all Dennis's fault.
Guilt by association.
But honestly, I think that the House, like on the state employees, I think there may be some differences in the House. Again, the House and the Senate have disagreed on these kinds of matters in the past. You should expect them in the future on compensation for state employees, probably the tax changes, and then they'll be negotiated out.
All right, we're going to come back and talk some more about the Senate budget, but I want to ask, have you signed up to receive our free weekly email newsletter Spin Cycle? It's easy. Just go to our website, ncspin.com, and sign up. And while you're there, you can view the latest NC Spin show, get video footage and perspective pieces not seen anywhere else, and read my weekly column. Get more balanced debate from the Old North State at ncspin.com, NCSpin on YouTube, or on Twitter at NCSpin Tweets. Back with more budget talk.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
North Carolina has over 300,000 government retirees who depend on their pension. Since the 2008 recession, retirees have seen little or no cost of living increase, while inflation has increased more than 14%. Investing in our retirees is good for the economy. Every pension dollar generates more than $2 for your local economy. Tell your local and state elected official it's time to take care of our retirees and fund a cost of living increase.
Learn more at ncrgea.com.
I hear it all the time. Rising health care costs are squeezing North Carolina families. Deductibles continue to climb, prescription drug prices are skyrocketing, medical bills are unknown until they arrive in the mail, and premiums are increasing by double digits. This is decimating family budgets. We should be focused on education and jobs, not EpiPen cost and medical bill errors. We need quality, affordable, and transparent health care for our families.
12,000 North Carolina veterans are uninsured with no options to buy health insurance. They fought for us. Now let's fight for them. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
We continue talking about the Senate's budget proposals. John, there were some interesting provisions in this budget. One would add a new cabinet-level secretary, the Department of Safety, removed from the Department of Crime Control and Public Safety, would house the Highway Patrol, the SBI, and other law enforcement functions. What was the justification for this?
Well, it's the Department of Public Safety, which is the current name of the combined department. It was created under former Governor Bev Perdue, and at that time the Republican legislature. And basically you took the old crime control and public safety, added correction, added juvenile justice, moved some other things in, so you had all the public safety agencies in one place. The argument now from the Senate and even from some friends and colleagues of mine, is that it would be better to take that unified department and break it into two pieces and have all the law enforcement and public safety entities in the Department of Public Safety, and then have the correction and juvenile justice pieces separate in their own
So there
department.
wasn't a political agenda here?
Not exactly, though. Governor Cooper does not favor this idea. He favored keeping the, and I actually, in this case, I'm not convinced that it's a good idea to separate into the two departments. I'm willing to be persuaded, but I'm not seeing it
Chris,
right now.
I want to go back to something you said a little earlier about education. The Senate allocated $75 million for new classroom constructions for school systems. The money comes from the state lottery. They're reallocating the funding from the state lottery, while at the same time they're allowing the lottery to increase their advertising from 1% to 2%. What's your reaction to that?
Well, increasing lottery advertising is a terrible idea, I think, but this is a pattern that's happened several times in the last few years. Instead of funding things through the current tax system and tax code, they're trying to shift lottery money to take care of things that they don't want to pay for the regular way. I'm all for more school construction, especially in rural areas that have a hard time raising the money. But if the whole lottery is out of control, we certainly don't need to increase advertising. We need to go back to the original purpose, which is education, early childhood. Let's have one or two things we use it for instead of just using it as a slush fund.
Dennis, I want to go to another proposal. The budget cuts $4 million from your alma mater, the University of North Carolina School of Law. This and redirects $11 million to the Asheville campus of UNC's medical school. But this seems to be an obvious retaliatory move for the Civil Rights Center at UNC, is it?
Well, you have to be suspicious because of the acrimony that has developed between the law school and the leadership in the General Assembly. Actually, Tom, I was a Wake Forest Law School graduate.
Well, I thought you went to Carolina.
Undergrad.
Please forgive me.
Dipped in blue and trimmed in gold. But I will say that I think that you have to question why they would take money away from one graduate program and put it in another like that at Chapel Hill.
Well, there's no question about it. I don't think there's any issue about this. Connie, you mentioned the fact that there were policy decisions contained in this budget. We saw a policy decision about human trafficking. We saw a policy decision about raising the age. No money attached to either one of them. Why weren't these just passed as legislation? Why did they feel like they had to put it in the budget?
There has been frustration between both chambers that there's a huge policy bill that passes one chamber and gets stuck in another, and then everything gets held hostage, and we have these battles at the end of session. And for the Senate, they just like, we're not going to play the game that way. We're going to put it in the budget.
All right, we've said that the next move is moving over to the House. The House is then going to make their alterations, send it back to the Senate. We'll have a conference committee. And typically, John, when this conference committee gets together, the budget gets raised. Can you expect that we're going to see more than a $22.9 billion spending package?
For the general fund, you mean?
Yes.
Perhaps a little bit. I think the House spending number might come in a little bit higher than the Senate spending number. I don't think there'll be radical differences.
How about the
between the two budgets.
$500 million tax cuts, Chris?
Well, I think that'll be where the difference is, and I think the House wants to cut taxes slightly less than the Senate. But reportedly, House leaders have been meeting with the Senate leaders all along, which you'd think would be good for the getting out of town, but it's actually terrible because it means all this is being done outside of the public's eye.
Senator Berger says they expect to pass a budget mid-June and get everything finalized by that point. Given where we are right now, Dennis, you've been through this a lot. Is that viable?
They have a good shot at it. If they pass the budget in the Senate like they did this week, it's going to the House jumps on it. Yeah, I think they could get done by the middle of June.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, another repeal, another override.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
I am Kathy Merritt, and I have worked at Cherry Hospital, a state-run psychiatric facility, for 27 years. Like 1 in 3 state employees, I still earn less than $31,000 a year because we haven't had a decent pay raise in years. When I started at 20 years old, that was a wonderful thing to have a state job. That's not the case anymore. And I love the job that I do. I just can't make it on what I do. It's not right. I work very hard. I love what I do, but it's difficult when you're not getting paid for what you do. You can't raise 2 kids on the salary that I had and not work another job and not apply for food stamps and not apply for medical benefits for your children. Tell your legislators to support a pay increase for state employees. Learn more at scenic.org.
The healthcare landscape is filled with questions and uncertainties of changes that are coming. In these times of change, there's one thing you can trust. You can trust your family physician to work for you, not only in treating sickness and disease, but also your overall health. Regardless of how healthcare might change, the men and women of the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians pledge to work upholding your trust. Family physicians, your trusted healthcare advisors.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
Hog waste has long been a subject of discussion in our state. We're the second largest pork producer in the nation and one of the largest sources of export income to our state. The legislature passed HB 467 that limited the amount nearby property owners can receive in perceived damages for their property, and as many expected, Governor Cooper promptly vetoed the bill. Dennis, this has been a political hot potato environmentalists and pork producers have been going at for a long time. The legislature appears to have come down on the side of the pork producers, raising the question, how big a so-called problem are these so-called nuisance lawsuits?
Well, I question that. I'm really suspicious whenever we try to limit court actions and jury verdicts and things like that. By nature, judges and juries in North Carolina have been fairly conservative. There's been very rare a runaway jury. And then you have this thing called Rule 11 in the Rules of Civil Procedure, where a judge can sanction lawyers who bring frivolous lawsuits. So I think safeguards are there. I would say that I would hope the General Assembly
Connie,
would
the House has
compromise on this.
overridden the governor's veto, and it's expected that the Senate is going to do the same thing. Does that mean that we're going to follow the recent pattern and a court case is going to follow?
That's almost a guaranteed, and the lawyers of North Carolina have done very well representing different court cases. It's been very profitable.
I was going to say financially.
Financially very profitable for them.
All right, well, I guess we will just wait and see how that's going to happen. We're going to take a break. After these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
North Carolina has over 300,000 government retirees who depend on their pension. Since the 2008 recession, retirees have seen little or no cost of living increase, while inflation has increased more than 14%. Investing in our retirees is good for the economy. Every pension dollar generates more than $2 for your local economy. Tell your local and state elected official it's time to take care of our retirees and fund a cost of living increase.
Learn more at ncrgea.com.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception. Keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
Our state has more than 300,000 with no options for health insurance. 63% are in working families, one illness away from disaster. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
I am Kathy Merritt, and I have worked at Cherry Hospital, a state-run psychiatric facility, for 27 years. Like 1 in 3 state employees, I still earn less than $31,000 a year because we haven't had a decent pay raise in years. When I started at 20 years old, that was a wonderful thing to have a state job. That's not the case anymore. And I love the job that I do. I just can't make it on what I do. It's not right. I work very hard. I love what I do, but it's difficult when you're not getting paid for what you do. You can't raise 2 kids on the salary that I had and not work another job and not apply for food stamps and not apply for medical benefits for your children. Tell your legislators to support a pay increase for state employees. Learn more at scenic.org.
Now it's time for one of the best parts of the show, when we ask our panel to tell us something we don't know. Hey, there's a rhyme there. Chris Fitzsimon, I'll start with you.
Well, we talked a lot on the show about the battle between the General Assembly university system, the state budget. The Senate budget reflects a new round in that. They actually give the Board of Governors 3 full-time staff members. The board hires, they just work for the board. Traditionally, that's been the general administration staffing it. It shows you that the Board of Governors, even with Margaret Spellings, a prominent Republican running the university system, there's still a lot of animosity between the folks who run the university and the folks who run the General Assembly.
Interesting. Connie Wilson, tell us something we don't know.
Well, this year the Senate put about 8 or 9 pages of Certificate of Need reform. They do away with CON requirements for ASCs, for hospice, and then they do a full phase out by 2025. This is very innovative. It reduces costs, increases accessibility, and it's putting their neck out on the line because it's a controversial issue.
And the hospital association is getting ready to come after them. All right, Dennis, tell us something we don't know.
There are 4 mega sites, all of them east of Greensboro. The experts in economic development across the country are saying that North Carolina is poised to be the #1 site for a major high-tech manufacturing facility. If it happens, it's going to be transformational in this state. Not only will it mean thousands of jobs, but it's going to change the quality of life throughout North Carolina.
We're talking something like the Mercedes plant was in Alabama, or BMW in Spartanburg.
Absolutely. If you want to go see what it does to a region, go down to Greenville, South Carolina, and see what BMW did to that place.
John, tell us something we don't know.
Tom, the projections from the Census Bureau are that by 2035, North Carolina will add another 2 million people to its population, going from 10 million to about 12 million. Almost half of those new arrivals to North Carolina will be over the age of 65 or older. Wow. So it will change a lot of things, including our politics. In the short run, at least, we're going to get older in our population, not younger.
All right. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.